Welcome back to Wired for Change, where we explore the ideas, people, and technology that are reshaping our world. I'm your host, Amy Yee. Today, we're diving into one of the most invisible and yet impactful parts of our daily lives: logistics. From the packages on our doorstep to the supply chains behind entire industries, logistics is where efficiencies, cost, and climate impact collide. My guest today is Richard Savoie, engineer, entrepreneur, and CEO of Adiona Tech, a company using AI and advanced simulation to transform the way goods move. Under Richard's leadership, Adiona has already powered tens of millions of deliveries, cut emissions, and won recognition on the global startup stage. We'll talk about his journey from engineer to entrepreneur, how Adiona is rethinking last mile delivery with sustainability in mind, and where the future of logistics and AI is headed. So let's get started. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Amy. Really delighted to be here.
Wonderful. Now, I know that you're in Boston. You're from Boston, but you're not in Boston probably right now, are you?
Correct. I'm originally from Boston and spent about 30 years there, but the last 15 years have been here in sunny Sydney, Australia.
Amazing. I'm gonna have to ask you one day how life is there, because all we hear are all the stories about Australia that are scary over here in North America. But I'm sure it's very beautiful too. So, what sparked your shift from engineering to entrepreneurship and sustainability?
It's a good question because I don't think that there was ever a time where I wasn't an entrepreneur. It was just a varying scale and degree. So I first started my first business when I was about 11, selling candy to other kids at school. And purely just because I wanted the Air Jordans that my parents couldn't afford, and so if I wanted them, I needed to buy them myself, and so selling candy was a way I figured out how to do that. Literally going and buying Jolly Ranchers wholesale at Costco, and then selling them at school for a nickel each, including to teachers sometimes. Surprising how much latitude I got to do that. But then, I was working from a very young age and always really excited to run my own business. But when I got excited about engineering, at age 15 or something like that, in electronics and things like that, there wasn't a time, at 15 that I felt like I could start an electronics-based business. So I entered into the corporate work stream, kind of like everybody else, went to uni and got excited about building medical devices, and then spent a long time doing that. So cardiology, cardiovascular devices. And I think eventually I learned enough about how to run a proper business, not just selling candy to kids, that I was able to then take all of that experience and turn it into my own business. And at that time, had firmly decided that the next business was going to be something related to sustainability and social impact, and it ended up becoming Adiona.
Nice. I find that really interesting because I do talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and a lot of them did start like in the schoolyard. And I feel like there could be some sort of assessment that happens in the schoolyard to find out, you find those kids who are selling stuff to other kids and making a profit kind of thing. And then identify them for future growth and development. Do you know what I mean? I feel like it's something that's in the blood, and I've seen this path where you go away and you learn some stuff that equips you better to sell and scale and go bigger and faster and to reach your dreams. So it's a really interesting story, the Jolly Ranchers. So thanks for that. And then, so where did Adiona come from, and also the name?
Well, the company itself, I'll start with the company because that predates the name, and the idea was actually, based on my sister's journey, who has always worked in retail, and at the time, about 10 years ago, I was working at a grocery store outside of Boston, and she would travel past three instances of the exact same grocery store chain to get to the one that she worked at. So imagine going past, and she wasn't doing anything particularly exotic. She was stocking shelves and things like that. So she could have been working at a grocery store closer or at a retail environment closer, but instead she was spending 35 minutes a day commuting each way to this grocery store. And to me, at scale, that inefficiency seemed really interesting. I wasn't sure that there was a business to it necessarily, but do you optimize your life? Are you one of these people? You seem like maybe you're a little bit of an optimizer to me, Amy. any entrepreneur is trying to maximize the stuff that they can do in a day with
Yeah.
limited time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And commuting is that always, is not always feels like a good use of time, especially if you have to
That's
drive.
right.
You
Absolutely.
can't do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
You're held captive in the car. So basically, we went around and collected data from 20 different grocery stores here in the Sydney area about where people in similar jobs were commuting from. And we found that by optimizing them to redeploy them to the stores that would be closest to where they lived, you could reduce the aggregate commute time for the entire group by 31%. And so this was a project that I did with my co-founder, who I found through a PhD program here in Australia. He's a specialist in AI, optimization mathematics, and computer science. And we built this algorithm together to say, well, what if we redesigned the transport system for this grocery chain, to minimize their employees' commute time? And the cool thing that could have come out of that is when you reduce commute time, there's a lot of research from UC Berkeley, Stanford, lots of labor think tanks in the US that show a very clear correlation between smaller commute time means that a person will stay in a job longer. And so if that person stays in the job longer, it means that the company has to recruit less, they have to train less, they incur a lot less costs in staffing and human resources. So that was where we were kind of going with that whole business. Long story short, it didn't work.
Hmm.
And it didn't work for many, many reasons. It was I chalk it up as a failure, but one of those delightful educational failures where um, we couldn't integrate that type of thinking into the human resources IT stack that currently exists.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we got a lot of support from people who were like, "Oh, this is a great idea. That we can make it work. We can find the IT stack that would work for it." Long story short, I was running out of money. I was running out of time. I couldn't raise investment here in Australia for something like this. But I met an amazing ecosystem of supporters and people who really did see the value in it. And one of those was Coca-Cola. And the Coca-Cola bottler here in Australia at the time was Coca-Cola Amatil. They've since been acquired by CCEP, Coca-Cola Europe Pacific Partners. They saw a huge potential value in what we were doing and the way we were thinking about it. But we then started applying the same ideas and concepts to their logistics systems and their delivery systems. And we realized, being outsiders to logistics ourselves, the enormous opportunity there was to both improve efficiency and reduce costs, but also by way of reducing those costs, reducing emissions and improving the sustainable options for those delivery fleets, including converting them over to lower emissions vehicles like EVs and things like that. And that is my very long way of explaining the name Adiona, which is the Roman goddess of the return journey.
Mm-hmm.
So Adiona and her sister Abiona were responsible for making sure that school children, especially, were safely getting back and forth to school. And it was a perfect name for us, just because there's this delightful story around looking after the world and improving sustainability by way of transport.
That's beautiful. My daughter's gonna love that. She's very into Greek mythology and stories, so that's great.
Uh,
Um, and so how excited were you when Coca-Cola was interested in what you were doing?
It was exciting and terrifying. We felt like talk about imposter syndrome to the
Right.
extreme,
Yeah.
right? You come from a completely different domain, and now suddenly we're plugged in with one of the biggest companies in the world, full stop, biggest companies, but then also one of the biggest logistics operators and fleet aggregators in the world. So yeah, it was absolutely terrifying. And luckily, again, I just have this amazing network of friends and supporters that we met along the way.
Mhm.
Also, just a quick story. I remember one of my personal friends, when I was telling him about this situation and how we were about to enter into a proof of concept with the Coke company, and he was like, "Wow, that's a big deal." And I said, "Yeah, and I have absolutely no idea what we're doing." And he gave me like one of his Lean Six Sigma books from his black belt or green belt training, and I was aware of that type of stuff, but um, it really helped guide the proof of concept process with Coke. And also then me calling other friends and colleagues and ex-colleagues from previous companies and being like, "You've worked with these big companies as a consultant before. Give me some advice on how to engage with them." And it was amazing, actually, at the time to bring in just so many different people's experience to help navigate what was a very pivotal thing for our company. Because if we didn't succeed, it would have all just gone, quietly under the rug, and they never would have talked about it. But because the proof of concept did succeed, and because they were excited about it, they were very vocal about their support for us. And, one of the pitfalls in working with big companies like that, especially as an early stage startup, is it proved that there was value on the table, but it took them 2 years to go in and build a business case to actually implement us. And so at the time, we were left hanging. We were left on the end of a loose thread where they said, "Great job, guys. We really appreciated that proof of concept. We're going to use that to go back to the board and get some funding to implement it. But we'll see you in a year or two."
Right, which is a really long time in startup life, right?
Right. It's a lifetime, literally, because you'll die on the vine. And we had to then decide, okay, cool. What do we do now? Can we leverage this into investment either internally in the Coke ecosystem or with external VC or private equity? What we ended up being able to do was use those case studies and those relationships with Coke to land a different big customer here in Australia.
Nice.
Totally off the back of that proof of concept. And that got us kicking into revenue. Right. And then we were able to raise money and all that other stuff.
Wow. Amazing. And that, that kind of goes to a question I had around that. Like for Coca-Cola, do you know, like, was this a problem that they already recognized internally that they were actively looking for a solution for?
Well, that's a really interesting one, because when we first met with them, they were running a corporate accelerator.
Okay.
And their corporate venture capital was running this accelerator. And we actually didn't take part in the accelerator. It was just that we knew the people that were running it, and they gave us a warm introduction. And so the people that were running the accelerator knew optimization, full stop, was a problem across the business. They're always looking to optimize things. They're always looking for new techniques. And especially, we're talking 2020, they were starting to look at AI more seriously. And so when we showed them what we'd done in that commute project space, they said, cool. What they understood was we are optimization specialists. And so could we potentially leverage our skills in optimization across different aspects of the business, whether it be optimizing sales and SKUs in the product world to optimizing logistics and delivery? And the one problem statement that stuck out for us was around logistics, because that's where there's going to be a sustainability and a net social benefit for it. But the problem brief that they came to us with was really about optimizing reduction in missed delivery calls. And basically what I mean is that you estimate or you project that your customer is going to need X amount of Coca-Cola or whatever it is on a certain day. And so your inventory projections are all managed, and your warehouse projections are all managed based on what your anticipation of that customer's need is going to be. And then what they found is that they'd get out into the field, and then those projections would be wrong. And they said, well, could you help us optimize that? We said, sure. So we did this big data science exercise as part of the proof of concept to help them with that very specific problem. And lo and behold, what we actually found is that when my co-founder said, well, why are you actually setting up your deliveries in this particular way? And I won't go too deep into the detail, but basically he uncovered the fact that while their perceived problem was X, there was a much larger, more material problem that was Y, that was hidden in the data. And the machine learning was able to pull that to the front and show them that there was a bigger opportunity that nobody had really identified as a human, because it was hidden in the data. And that was what got everybody way more excited about AI, was this opportunity to uncover insights that nobody had even seen.
Wow, that is super exciting. And thanks for that bit of insight as well about, just how to engage with large customers and what it looks like sometimes, because I think that, a lot of startups can benefit, from understanding that dynamic a little bit more. And just another question just around sort of a lot of these bigger companies, is it hard for them to optimize themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll use them as an example because they have an enormous global footprint, and what people may not understand or just know about the Coca-Cola ecosystem is, the brand owns a stake in all of the bottlers, but the bottlers themselves are independent companies. And they have their own shareholders, they have their own territories that they cover, and usually they have their own other portfolio of diversified businesses. You look at a company like Swire Coca-Cola based out of Hong Kong. They're an enormous global company that has airlines and warehouses and logistics, and then Coke is just part of their business. So the short answer is they can optimize themselves, but everyone is unique.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're all looking at it in a different lens. They're all looking at it from their particular portfolio and their particular territory and the relationships that they have with other companies. Like, for instance, Coca-Cola owning their bottlers or having investment stake in their bottlers. Whereas you look at PepsiCo does it very differently.
Mm-hmm.
And also a client of ours, but their way of working is very, very different, where they don't necessarily own stakes in their bottlers, and they fully outsource that bottling capability to companies like Asahi and Suntory Frucor.
Mm-hmm.
And so each one so unique, so different, which is a great opportunity for us because it means that there's no single answer to how to optimize those businesses. That all needs to be looked at in a unique lens. And then if you can enable technology to do that, as well as having the human co-pilot ride along, you're going to get the best of both worlds.
Amazing. So that is something that you're able to help with. That's what you bring to the table, essentially.
Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah,
Very
exactly.
cool.
And then we partner with a network of advisories and consultancies like KPMG, because again, we really focus on SaaS, software as a service. That's what we want to be when we grow up, is just the best in breed SaaS globally for this, and we're already on our way to that. But I feel like if you spend too much time in services, obviously you then are worried about billable hours and services, and takes your target off the technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very hard to be both a services and a product kind of company. And so, just to be crisp around what Adiona does, maybe you could explain a little bit about the product vision that you have.
Yeah, happy to. So for people who aren't familiar with the space, everybody knows Amazon and everybody knows Alibaba and Temu and Shein and all these companies that are in Walmart in the US that do amazing jobs of rapid commerce. And they've elevated the game for delivery logistics globally, because now we all expect or want an Amazon style level of service when we order a product, which means that you order the product, you know when it's due to be delivered, you get constant communications telling you if it's on track or if it's not, any changes that are related to it. And so there's this transparency level down to, in some markets where you can even follow along Uber Eats and DoorDash style and actually see the real-time tracking of the courier on their way to your house. Now, most organizations can't match that. They can't get close, especially when you look at the older kind of postal organizations globally. You've got polar opposite ends of the spectrum. You've got this highly technology-enabled Amazon-style delivery experience. In the middle, you've got your FedEx and UPS and other maybe regional carriers that do a great job and can offer something similar, but again, it's not quite to that level yet. And then you got postal organizations that are generally playing catch up and trying to figure out how to keep Amazon from eating their lunch. So what we allow is for all of those shipments and all of those deliveries to flow through our central platform that then consolidates, optimizes, provides delivery routes, tracking, visibility, transparency, end to end. And so those shippers and those transport companies can then offer that similar type of experience to their customers. So if, say, for instance, I'll give you a real life example here in Australia, which is if you order a meal kit for delivery tomorrow from HelloFresh or Marley Spoon or whoever, right? That's typically serviced by a third-party logistics company that keeps all of that product in their cooled warehouse, the refrigerated warehouse. They have refrigerated vans and trucks. And that order from your shopping cart flows through to them. They're going to have to fulfill it on behalf of the brand. But at the same time, thousands and thousands of other people are doing the exact same thing. They all need to be delivered on time. So all of that data flows through our AI. We then solve those problems for that fulfillment company and tell them, tomorrow, here's your delivery routes. Here's where they need to start. Here's where they need to end. Here's your ETAs for all of those deliveries along the way that you can push out to your customers via text message or email or whatever. And then it's all sorted for them. And what you find is that's typically a really high value problem for those companies because they operate on very low margins to begin with. It's very hard to find drivers and supply chain workers these days. It's a very expensive business. And so any efficiency that they can create and any automation they can create tends to be very valuable for them.
Well, and it seems like a problem that is, that AI is so well suited for, as well, in this time, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about
I did.
agentic AI and things as well, and that's a huge opportunity to make it even better.
Yeah, well, and I've the complexity of it is something that I find so fascinating. Really, what role do you see AI and simulation playing? As logistics gets more complex.
Well, just to go back to the sustainability component, I think it's important for people to understand that transport is the second largest emitter globally,
Hmm.
right? So just to think about that, electricity grid is the top. But if you look here in Australia, we've been decarbonizing the electricity grid, successfully for a while. We've got a lot of solar power here in Australia, right?
Yeah.
And so transport by 2030 is going to be the single largest emitting industry in Australia and in some other markets globally. Now you break that down into the types of transport, and it's always surprising when people hear that air transport, sea transport are very small compared to road transport.
Hmm.
Road transport is about 70 to 75% of the transport related emissions. So then you unpack that and say, cool, well, it's basically split that in half between passenger transport, like private transport when we drive our cars, versus commercial transport.
Mhm.
And so, again, you're talking about the second largest emitting industry, and about half of the biggest component of that is commercial transport. So there's a huge opportunity to reduce emissions by optimizing. And what we also find and is really cool, when you simply re-optimize the old school internal combustion engine vehicles that are on the road today,
Mhm.
they tend to have a really low utilization rate. They're running 40% empty most of the time. So if you optimize them well,
Mhm.
it's actually the cheapest way to reduce emissions globally.
Hmm.
It's dollar for dollar. You can abate more carbon by optimizing the existing diesel network than you can by carbon capture, than you can by hydrogen vehicles, than you can by electric vehicles. So it's really, from our perspective, where we should be starting, because it is a massive opportunity that's easily accessible right in front of us,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so then now AI, if we allow it to look for those opportunities in a very well-defined existing network, it's just a perfect tool to do that, because we know the structure of how roads are laid out. We
Mhm.
know the historical traffic on those roads. We know where all the warehouses are. We know where all the customers are. We have all of the information in a very structured physical world system, right? And then we unleash AI on it and train it properly. And suddenly it's an incredibly powerful tool to realize those efficiency gains, the sustainability gains so fast. And that's what we're trying to leverage.
You sound to me like somebody who enjoys puzzles.
Always have, always have.
Right.
Absolutely. And get really frustrated when I can't solve one.
There you go.
Is that you? Is that you
A
too?
little bit, yeah. I
Yeah,
admit
a little bit.
it. So you've got a lot of pieces, for sure. If we think of it as a puzzle, you've got a lot of pieces. You just mentioned a lot of them. Now we've got AI, and you've been working with AI for some time now. What's still missing? Like, what are some of the challenges you say, you'd be facing in trying to, optimize this problem for this problem?
Well, one thing that hopefully anybody listening to this that's looking to work in the enterprise space, because we really cater exclusively to medium and large enterprise.
Mhm.
Um, one of the biggest challenges is simply getting airtime to do these types of things over other problems that they have.
Mhm.
And I just mean that any big enterprise is always going to have a laundry list of problems that they're trying to solve.
Mhm.
Um, Sustainability is never going to be a top one in the near future. Unfortunately, that's just the reality that we live in, and I hope everybody takes that with a grain of salt. That we are a sustainability business,
Yeah.
but we're being very realistic that you can't sell into a lot of businesses based on that alone. So it's about coming up with a win-win scenario, or I call it a triple win scenario, where you can explain to these big organizations that they're going to get financial efficiency and recoup margins and increase their top line revenue. That's another huge part of what we do, is if you can use AI to control your fleets and your operations better and automate them, you can actually sell more. Because of all of that, you're going to reduce your emissions. You're going to get a commensurate, linear relationship, the amount of emissions that you reduce to do that, which makes everybody else happy, and you can add to your brand story. And then, of course, we're all going to benefit because we reduce congestion on the roads. We reduce, smoke and smog in cities, all the other obvious benefits that you get out of this, and digging up less coal and, digging up less oil. So those are the big challenges. Is how do you make a great story that will get to an enterprise at the right stage in their journey, so that they will invest in this type of in this type of transformation, because it is not trivial. It's something that does require a lot of work, and so you have to sell them on that work. And I'm very pleased, and we know that we're very lucky that we've evolved to a point now where our biggest challenge is awareness and getting into businesses at the right time. But it's $1 trillion industry. There's no shortage of businesses that could be using this.
Absolutely. And so anything that you found is resonating with people in order to get their attention, if it's not, so much around sustainability, are there things that people are looking for specifically, like in your experience, that has worked as a conversation for you?
I think the electric vehicle conversation is starting to pick up enough velocity that it's getting exciting. We kind of did a build it and they will come scenario where we built some EV routing and analysis and simulation tools that nobody really used for quite a while. But knowing that we had it was something that's important for a lot of companies that do understand they'll be able to reduce their costs, they'll be able to reduce their emissions. These are all important things for them. But I think that's starting to catalyze some excitement in the industry when they see other companies that are actually succeeding with electric vehicles. You look at what PepsiCo is doing in the U.S. and Walmart investing a lot, and USPS. There's all these success stories that are starting to become more material. And then in the passenger EV space, in Scandinavia, countries like Norway, where it's like 95% of new vehicles are electric. These are all things that I think business leaders are paying attention to, but you have to come in and say, we've got it all figured out, and we'll shepherd you through all of the question marks and all of the risks and the perceived risks. And again, you combine EVs and AI, and suddenly it becomes a more plausible and practical story for some of these big companies that you can actually make some early gains and get return on investment very quickly.
There must be some nuances like around different countries that you might be, marketing in as well, based on regulations or other drivers that they have within those countries. I think you're moving into the U.S., mainly now. Is that correct? Or are there other countries you're targeting? Just because you have such a global view on things.
Oh yeah, it's interesting because like Canada was similar to Australia and Europe in making emissions reporting a mandatory thing and scaling it for companies of different sizes. And that's certainly driven a lot more awareness over emissions and emissions management. And so that's been a big driving force in terms of when we pick a market to look towards. Are there any macro regulatory differences between markets that we can leverage that will actually make our value proposition more attractive in that market? And that's something I learned from the medical device days. One of my old managers said, the most profitable medical device businesses are the ones that are regulated into existence.
Yes.
And I've seen that firsthand where, FDA guidance or CE guidance on using a certain medical device after surgical procedure suddenly changed the game overnight, and companies were selling products that didn't even exist to meet a regulatory mandate. Emissions is the same thing happening and unfolding in a slightly different way. And then also safety and chain of responsibility, those regulations, and gig worker and gig economy regulations in different markets. One of the things that it's important to watch as it plays out is certain states in Australia, certain territories worldwide, San Francisco being an early one, change gig worker compensation to the point where suddenly a lot of the work that had been done by point-to-point gig workers needed to be consolidated and bundled in order to make it efficient enough for the business model to work. I see that as a very good thing because point-to-point gig work is not very efficient and you can't bundle it. So if you can let the regulatory changes drive a consolidation and an efficiency, we're there to then facilitate that for those companies who need to make the shift.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of different things. I guess to sum it up, right? It's emissions management and reporting. It's labor macro forces in different economies and how they see the world. And then it's how does supply chain as the global backbone of the economy then meet those things where they need to be.
There's a lot of different influences to keep an eye on. And to go back to the technology piece again for a second, you've talked about quantum computing and agentic AI. Are those things that we're going to see become, very real in terms of touching fleet management anytime soon? Are they already there?
Quantum is something that I'm super passionate about. I think I told you when we talked before, I
Mm-hmm.
actually did my undergrad thesis on quantum computing way back in 2001.
Okay.
I've been following it ever since. So for optimization, quantum computing is the theoretical panacea that's going to make it so much easier and more efficient to solve. It's still a ways away, but we are working on it actively, and we're working on a partnership with a quantum hardware company to deploy and pilot some of those solutions in the field, which is exciting. But quantum is useful for all sorts of things. So if people don't know much about it, I highly recommend going and have a look at using quantum for cryptography and encryption generally, but also navigation using the magnetic field of the Earth with quantum transceivers to navigate. It's really cool stuff that you can do. But I see that being, again, it's very hardware limited, and so we're years away from that. Agentic AI, that's another huge opportunity that we spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
That the ability to set goals for AI agents and tell them, for instance, this is a project that we were working on with a client where in markets where there's snowstorms that disrupt the delivery system, it's very difficult to predict where blockages in the road network are going to be based on a snowstorm and slowdowns in traffic. But you can tell an agentic system, we want to prioritize two things, just for example, in this use case. Delivery of the most high priority products. So if you're, for instance, a medical device distributor and you've got surgeries that are happening today or tomorrow, you want to prioritize those deliveries to make sure that those procedures don't get canceled or rescheduled. But then everything else that maybe falls into a lower priority tier, we want to maximize revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And then further to that, maybe we don't want to just maximize revenue. We actually want to be calculating the cost of every delivery in real time on the network and then prioritizing margin. And that's what agentic AI can do, is it can look across that entire network and in real time be chewing all those variables, the external ones that we can't control, like a snowstorm on the road network, but figuring out how to then readapt the delivery routes, the instructions to the drivers, the turn-by-turn routing to then achieve those goals, priorities, revenue, margins, whatever else might be relevant to them at the time. Maybe they're, maybe they're an ice cream manufacturer, so they're not particularly worried about being late in a cold snowstorm because the ice cream demand is dropped. But for the people selling the hand warmers, the hot hands hand warmers, they need to get to the stores much faster. So again, it sounds like a silly example, but if you're a 3PL carrier that's carrying both ice cream and hand warmers, the agentic AI can actually be real-time adapting the priorities to get the right product on the shelves at the right time to maximize revenue and margins. And that's just something that a human, even a team of humans, by the time they even got close to figuring it out, the window of opportunity would have closed. It would be a day later. And so, the humans can't do that at that scale at that speed. And that's really exciting.
That is exciting. AI really scales, the opportunities, that are available. And I can really see that in terms of the examples you're describing. Is there any scaling of risk that you see or potential, downsides to, what might happen in the future with respect to AI in the logistics field specifically?
It's also a great question. Risk, I'll unpack it from just two lenses. One is that when we talk about that transparency of data and where your delivery is, there's a whole macro layer above that, which I kind of alluded to from a regulatory context around responsibility, chain of responsibility, driver safety, field safety, making sure that those people are really well looked after. And one of the cool things about these types of solutions is that when you start to strip out human error, you make the whole thing much safer.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that obviously autonomous vehicles and driving from a passenger perspective are still very under hot debate. And there's a lot of people who would argue that it's not as safe because once in a while there are accidents and there's problems with autonomous vehicles. But I would argue that when we figure it out, it's going to be much, much safer because the majority of accidents and problems are caused by tired people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very well studied and proven that, especially in commercial driving, it's fatigue that is the number one killer. And AI doesn't get tired. It doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And so you can, again, augment the humans. And we're seeing that play out in all sorts of different ways. The earliest one is, AI cameras that are detecting when a truck driver is tired and then rings a chime to wake them up. Okay, cool. But now imagine extrapolating that out to a fully autonomous network where the human is just supervising. And again, keep in mind too, there's a massive shortage of drivers and people in manufacturing jobs all over North America and Canada and the US. There's hundreds of thousands of jobs that are going unfilled in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
So let's not have any illusion that by automating these processes, we will not only save money and reduce the labor required, which is already in a shortage, but we'll make it safer.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be a better outcome. You'll be safer on the road because there's less likely, a fatigued driver that's going to make a bad behavior. And then the second, risk component is around risk to business.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Australia, I don't know the numbers for Canada or the US. In Australia, the business risk to run logistics is enormous, and the number of insolvencies is up over 150% in the last 2 years, mainly because businesses have done a poor job mitigating risk.
Mm-hmm.
They've locked themselves into contracts that did not take into account the actual inflation numbers and labor growth, labor cost growth, did not take into account fuel subsidy changes and changes in fuel costs. So we are seeing trucking companies in Australia just falling over left and right because they've not adequately mitigated the risks.
Wow.
And another beautiful use case for AI,
Wow.
because our AI already helps people do forward projections when they're looking at bringing on a new contract and say, well, how many vans am I going to need? How many trucks am I going to need? How many drivers? How much is it going to cost? So they're using our AI to then lock into a contract that actually has a risk mitigation buffer in it. They've done that scenario analysis. It's real.
Wow.
So really exciting to see it from so many different angles, right?
Yeah, it really is. Richard, I got to say, I feel like you'd be a very fun guy to, whiteboard with. Just,
I'd like to think so. Except you got to have the time, right? Because the whiteboard will get full and you'll need to flip it over and we'll need to do both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one last question before I let you go. And I guess what I'm wondering is, do you have any advice that you would give to entrepreneurs who want to tackle like big, messy problems, like systems problems, like supply chains, and where everyone is, so many diverse stakeholders with so many processes and things that have been there for quite a long time, and there's sprawl, for example. Any advice you give for entrepreneurs in that kind of a space, because it can seem very daunting, I think.
Yeah, I know it sounds. There's two pieces that are going to be really simplistic. One is be careful who you take advice from. I oftentimes say it's a lot like having kids. Don't trust anybody's advice unless they have at least 3, because anybody who has kids knows that each one is so different. And if they say, oh, this is what works for my kid, it'll work for your kid. No, that's ridiculous.
Right.
Same thing goes for business. Same thing goes for startups or even mature businesses. I've met so many successful entrepreneurs who've given me very specific advice on something to do that was totally wrong because it was right for their business, but it wasn't right for my business. So be very careful who you take advice from and always make sure that you understand where it's coming from and their context and their lens. And then the second thing is ignore your competition and only listen to your customers. I can't. I just was having a conversation earlier today about a company here in Sydney who, when I first started out, told me to just quit, and it wasn't worth doing because it was already done by all the competitors. And I thought, that was really depressing at the time because I took them really seriously and I felt really bad. I felt really bad going out of that meeting. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You have to be sad
Yeah.
sometimes. But they were wrong, because what we did is we went in and listened to our customers, and they told us all the things that those competitors were doing wrong or weren't doing well enough. And we exploited all of those opportunities, and we built something totally different that, while it sits in the same space, our customers would never leave us for any of those competitors, because we just do something totally different. And I don't sit up at night looking at what the competitors are doing, because that'll just send me down whatever rabbit hole they're in. And that isn't going to drive value for my customers. So long story short, just focus on solving the problem. Your customers will tell you the problem. They won't tell you how to solve it. Don't listen to them when they tell you how to solve it, because they're probably wrong. But listen to them about the problem, and then use your own brain and your own team and your own advice to get there.
That's fantastic, Richard. And thank you for that. I feel like I got like a little bonus out of that. There were 2 pieces of advice plus a bonus. That was amazing. What a great takeaway, for people, because I think there are a lot of people with really hard problems in very big, complex, messy systems that I see. And change is not easy. And there's a lot of transformation, I think, taking place. And I really appreciate your perspectives today. Really good stories. And I look forward to seeing more of what Adiona does in the market and where you guys go, and hope to see you when you're in North America as well. So thanks so much for making the time to be on our podcast.
My pleasure, Amy, and really thanks for having a laugh with me. I mean, that's more important than anything.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, that's another episode of Wired for Change. Please do take a minute to subscribe if you haven't yet already. We love talking about change and having conversations about what's going on in the world, and having a laugh now and again as well with wonderful guests like Richard. So please join us again. Take care. Bye-bye.